friends, it's Teresa and welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be me slowly dying because it is very hot right now where I am. It's very dry heat and I am so happy that my bookshelves are placed right in front of my air conditioning. Also, please ignore the can of Pringles. I am currently eating my feelings, and by feelings I mean hopefully if I eat enough the heat will go away. For the more realistic, the actual reason why I'm filming this video is because I am here to do my tea talk / my book review on the Bone Witch by Rin Chupeco. Let's just kind of get into it. This will be spoiler free, so if you have not read this, which I'd be kind of surprised if you haven't because a lot of people have talked about this on BookTube. It's pretty big, it's hype. I feel like it came out, I want to say 2017. Oh, 4 years ago. So 4 years ago, so if you guys haven't heard of it, you're hearing about it now, and I'm keeping it spoiler free for all y'all who may want to pick it up in the future. But let's just kind of get into it because I do have quite a few things to talk about, and don't worry, it's not ranting this time. So let's discuss the synopsis first. Now this is a YA high fantasy novel following young Thea, who is an Asha, who are kind of like witches in their community. She is part of a family of Ashas. Her older sisters are Ashas, and she's just waiting for her powers to kick in. That is until one day she hears the news that her older brother Fox has died serving the front lines against these demonic monsters that are currently ravaging their town. During his funeral, she ends up bringing him back to life, discovering to herself and announcing to everyone else that she is a bone witch, which means she can go ahead and she's basically a necromancer of sorts. This ends up ostracizing her from her community, and she ends up traveling to kind of, I believe, the main city in the kingdom, or one of the kingdom's main cities, to train as a bone witch. And as she's training, she finds herself kind of in the middle of a decision she never thought she'd really be a part of, considering there is kind of a war that is starting to happen in the book. I do want to give this some trigger and content warnings. I believe these are all mainly trigger warnings, but I need to double check with myself about the definition between trigger and content warnings. So just warnings about this book if you are picking it up, and then we'll go from there in future videos. There is death of a loved one, grieving, discussions of war, violence, and then brief mentions of parental abuse. Now, as for first thoughts, as I typically do in these videos, if you have not been here, when I do a book review or a tea talk, because you spill the tea, so I'm spilling the tea on the books. But my first thoughts on The Bone Witch is that, like I said, I heard about this when it first came out. First came out in 2017. I heard about it in a few of some popular booktubers channels. Super excited to pick it up. Did I ever pick it up? No, because I kept forgetting. But I was still super excited. I kept hearing it kind of get circulated back around. It still continued to be a book that I wanted to read come future times. I finally got this book when I was supposed to be reading for my API reads in May. Didn't get to it. And now I'm reading it for June for Queer Lit Readathon. It's the only book I managed to finish in Queer Lit Readathon. So that is where I'm at with my life right now. But this has pretty good rep. There is a really good, from what I heard from Kate before I read the book, there's good sibling rep. Rin Chupeco is non-binary. They go by they, them pronouns. There is, I believe, trans characters. I was just overall super excited, but then I was also very, very hesitant because I genuinely did not know if reading the book was going to end up living up to the hype that myself and everyone else around the world placed on me. Moving on to the good things that I enjoyed about this book. I really, really loved this book in its entirety. From beginning to end, there were so many things that were being built up and so many layers that were happening that you don't really exactly understand what's going to happen just quite yet. And the intercalary chapters that happen that are all in italics, which I will leave you guys to figure out exactly what that is on your own, says a lot about how the story unfolds from here without giving too much away. You are excited to pick up the second book because you have kind of some inkling of what happens, you're just not sure when. A lot of this book was just basically world building and setting up the relationships and the characters, which is pretty much standard for a lot of fantasy novels. Like, a lot of first books will set up the conflict, the characters, and the world building first in the first book, primarily because if the writing goes well, second and third book should be discussing the major conflict, character growth, and then the conclusion. So I wasn't too bothered that this was basically all like setting up, and it was kind of, it wasn't slow per se, because I found myself wanting to read more as I continued reading, but I would say it's definitely a bit more on the introspective side of what happens in the book, rather than a lot of the conflict coming from the outside. We start to see the beginnings of the conflict toward the end. A lot of the training and just the overall vibes of the book of the characters and the training of the Asha in the book reminded me a lot of Memoirs of a Geisha, which, like, if you look at like the similarities in Asha, Geisha, makes sense. I also spoke to my friend Kate about this, and she did in fact confirm that in an interview Rin mentions that they love the concept of how feminine and how hard, I forgot the exact words that Kate used, but how feminine and how graceful the training of the geisha were in Members of the Geisha, but disliked how it was put under the male gaze and made it kind of more attractive to men. So they went ahead and made that, and then kind of focused a lot more on the femininity and the hard work that actually does come with the training that happens within being a geisha. And I really enjoyed that. But even then, like, the overall vibe of it, I had a lot of geisha vibes. Like, you have the young girl who gets taken from her village to train and gets separated from her family and is just kind of trying to find her way around, and like the girl who doesn't like it. It's just a lot. But the vibes that I got was Memoirs of a Geisha, and like also kind of mixed with Spirited Away almost. I don't know, it's something about like how the world was set up and kind of the prose of it all. The vibe gave me Memoirs of a Geisha, but then when you figured it out, it also kind of gave you a bit more Studio Ghibli kind of Spirited Away, almost kind of like whimsical, but still has a little bit of a darker element to it. Going back to the world building, I love the different kinds of Asha? I'm gonna say Asha because it sounds close to like geisha. Different kinds of Asha and the powers. I can't get too much into it because it is, like, as of right now, the most that we've seen of the powers is as much as Taya has seen, and it's not super distinctive because not a spoiler, because her training doesn't go super in depth until about like middle of the book. But I still loved it either way. Like I said, it definitely did, like I said, Memoirs of a Geisha vibes, mixed with some Studio Ghibli vibes in here. Definitely enjoyed it. I loved all the characters. They were all super distinct and super separate from one another, that even though you met a lot of them at times, you knew exactly who they were and what made them different and their personalities right off the bat. You didn't have to figure it out along the way, you just knew, which was also very, very nice, considering the fact that, like, I love fantasy. I love writing fantasy. But, like, in terms of, like, fantasy in a very limited first-person perspective, it is very difficult sometimes to distinguish between characters because that's how the main character interprets them. So if there's an interpretation that they're not very distinct from so and so and so, it just kind of bleeds out that way. But this was very distinct and very, like, I knew who was who. I just knew. The plot twist at the end. The plot twist at the end. The plot twist at the end. Oh my god. The plot twist at the end. Like, y'all know how I was saying that this was all world building, setting up the conflict in the characters. The plot twist in like the last 50 pages, 100 pages. I was screaming. I was literally screaming. I was texting Kate. I was in the middle of Costco with my boyfriend because we were waiting for my tires to get changed out. And I was texting at Kate like, oh my god, what happened? Who is who? Who did this? What is this? And like, even at the end, the very end, where you think that, like, you know, it's a first book, you can only throw so many plot twists at the end, you would be wrong. There was another plot twist in here that destroyed me. It destroyed me, and I'm not prepared to actually read it, like, find out what happens in the second book. I am terrified. Absolutely terrified. Like, what? No. 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 That plot twist destroyed me, and if I didn't have a TBR set already, I would be rushing to Barnes & Noble and buying the second book. Moving on to the things I wasn't the biggest fan of in regards to this book, there was only like kind of one major thing that branches off a little bit. So my major thing is that you couldn't really distinguish how much time had passed. With that being said, Taya starts off as 12 in this book, which like would sit her more in middle grade, so you expect her to kind of progress throughout the book and age up, which she does. This isn't much of a spoiler because it's like, I'm not telling you a major life event, I'm just telling you. She does end up, by the end of the book, she is about 15, 16. And with that progression, I didn't see a huge change in how she spoke and how her mannerisms have changed. I didn't see kind of the diction in her wording when she wrote, when in her perspective, really shift that much from when she was 12. Which is why I was very confused as to what was going on and how much time had exactly passed until the note was mentioned in the book. It could have also been user error, and I could have also missed when she like had mentioned how old she was. But then I feel like that would have become noticeable as well, because that's about a 2-3 year gap between when she started versus where she ended, and you probably would have noticed the whole I am now 13. I am now 14. And then branching off with that, because we couldn't tell how much time had passed, and because Taya was so young when the book started, I genuinely have no idea how old any of the older characters are. Like when we first met Lady Michaela, who you meet very early on, so it is not a spoiler, I thought she was about like in her 50s or 60s. And now that I'm thinking about it, and I finished the book and I got a bit more of Michaela's backstory, I'm thinking she's about 30 or 40s. So like, it was very different imagery going on in my head that kind of counteracted what was actually happening in the book, and I was just very confused. I was like, so how old are you really? How has it been? A few months? Has it been a year? So that's kind of my biggest thing, but that could also be user error. Sometimes my eyes like to skip lines and I don't realize it and I don't go back. But I feel like with how they were written from the beginning, it also doesn't help that Taya is much younger than a lot of these characters. So that could also be it, that's why, but I genuinely have no idea how old some of these older characters are. I'm thinking like 60s, like 50s, 60s, like, you know, starting to slowly hunch over, has to kind of shuffle around a little bit more. But by the looks of it, sounds of it, they're about mid-30s, early 40s. So, don't know how much of that was actually user error. I'm gonna say about 80-20. Overall, I really enjoyed this book. I actually almost gave it a 4 to 5 stars, not because of anything bad, but because, like I said, most of the book is setting up the world building, the conflict, the characters, and the relationships. So a lot of it is, like, it's not slow, but it's not the most action-packed read you could have. It does get you going, and it does make you want to read more as the book continues, but it's not, like, super, like, flipping the pages a lot and, like, just super excited to know what happens. You're going about, like, not day-to-day, but, like, just her responsibilities and her learning how everything goes. Almost gave it a 4. And then the plot twist made me give it a 5. I also think the plot and the progression and the world building were done wonderfully. Like, I have an entirely wonderful idea of how this world looks, of how everything is shaped and how it works, that you cannot tell me otherwise. Like, this book gave you so much to imagine on your own, but then it also gave you so much information to fill in the line. I highly recommend this book if you guys have not picked it up just quite yet. It's such a good book. I enjoy it so much, and like I said, I highly recommend. But that is it for my video for today. I didn't die on camera, so maybe these Pringles have some magic life force in them. Pringles, please sponsor me. But yeah, that is it. If you guys have read this book, please let me know in the comments down below. If I have caused you to maybe read this book, let me know in the comments down below. Until next time, hit like, subscribe, comment if you guys have any video ideas for me, again, down below. This book, I will have the book listed down in the description, as well as any of my social medias. But until next time, I hope you guys are having a wonderful week, and if not, hopefully that week gets better, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!